cutting two different size squares to complete the diagonal blocks for the corners. One will be 5 7/8 inch square and the other will be 8 inches square. Oh, wait a minute. Why are we cutting these squares 8 inches when our blocks are only 7.5 inches? I don't understand that. Well, let me show you. That's what I thought too. The sides that are meeting the block, I cut 7.5 inches. So I made a 7.5 inch square, cut it in half diagonally, but if you look, it's too short on the diagonal edge. Do you see how it's pulling up on each side? It's not straight across. This is just not acceptable, and it would give you nightmares trying to put the quilt together when these pieces are so out of kilter. So to fix that, we went with 8 inch squares, which increased the diagonal length about 3/4 of an inch, just enough to make it lay nice and flat. Now that's definitely an improvement, don't you think? To cut all the pieces for all 4 corners, you'll need a total of 8 8-inch squares and 2 5 7/8 inch squares. Basically, you're going to need a piece of fabric 42 inches wide, and that's selvage to selvage, and 16 inches long to get all the pieces cut that you'll need. When you're done trimming all your blocks diagonally, you'll end up with 16 8-inch diagonal blocks and 4 5 7/8 inch diagonal blocks to complete your corners. The next step you're going to take is to sew 3 of your stars together for your first row. Then we'll start stitching on the diagonal blocks. When you're pinning your diagonal pieces to your block, make sure that you're extending your diagonal piece 1/4 of an inch beyond the block. If you just match it up to the end, it's not going to work out for you. You do have to have this dog ear right here. So let's go ahead and stitch this together. And I like to stitch it from the back side because that way I can see what's happening with the seams. The fact that the diagonal piece is actually on the bias, it will cooperate with us and just fill in just the way it's supposed to. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this. We'll lock our stitches. Okay, now the reason we're going that 1/4 inch beyond is when you open this up, now you can see where your corner is exactly on point with your block. So you're going to do that on the blocks that have the 3 blocks sewn together, and you're going to do the same thing on the single block. And then when I get back to you, we'll join those blocks together after we put the top block on. So now we have both the diagonal pieces put on the single star that goes on the second row, and I'm going to add the top diagonal right here to finish that corner. When you're pinning your corners together to put the top diagonal piece on, you should have a double dog ear like that on the corners. That'll ensure that your blocks are lining up correctly. So here we go again. Let's line that up so that we get that double dog ear on this side. And we'll go ahead and pin it. And let's just put one in the middle, just because. And we're ready to stitch that. Again, we're keeping the seam side up, the block side up, so that we can make sure that we don't have any seams flipping as we're stitching. We'll lock the stitches in. And again, we're going to lock the stitches in again. So now when we open that up, again, we have our corners so that we have a continual straight line coming off of each side, like so. So I'm going to press this, and I'll be back to join the whole corner together. So now we're ready to join the 3 stars with the diagonal pieces stitched to both sides, to the 1 star with the diagonal pieces stitched to the side, and the smaller diagonal piece stitched to the top. And this will form our corner. So we're going to flip this over, right sides together. And you want to start to pin it to match up the center seam of your top block with the center seam of the middle block. That'll guarantee that you have them lined up well. And you'll have to bear with me because it's kind of an overcast day here today, and I'm working black against black, so my visibility is not all that great. Now when we get to the ends, we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to make the double dog ears to make sure that we have a nice diagonal line all the way up. We're going to pin that. We're going to come over here and we're going to find the end of the center block, and we're going to put the seam for that block as well as the seam for the top block. We're going to match those up. I'm going to do the same thing over here. We're just going to match up the middle block seam, the outer seam, with the outer seam of the block in the top row. And if you're not sure that you're getting them matched, you can do that little trick where you put a pin in about 1/4 inch down, flip up your block, and see if they line up. And in this case, they do. So I'm going to put a pin in the opposite way, perpendicular to the seam. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just double check this one as well while we're at it. Put this in 1/4 inch from the seam line. We're going to pull this up, and we have that lined up well. So we're going to put the pin back in perpendicular to the seam. I'm going to come over on the opposite end, and we're going to make sure that we have the double dog ears. And we're going to pin that in place. Now I'm not a huge pinner, but if you want to add more pins, go right ahead. I'm going to take this over to the machine and stitch it, and then I'll be back with you. When we're all done assembling this corner unit, it should measure 36 inches across the widest point, 25.5 inches diagonally, and from the bottom to the top of the block, it should be 18 inches. Armed with that information, that will tell us how to cut our backing and our batting for these segments. This time I was using a little bit of caution. I wanted to make sure that this time my diagonal measurement would be large enough for what my needs are for the batting and the backing. So I had to resort to using math. And to figure out the diagonal measurement, if I cut a square 28 inches, multiply that 28 inches by the square root of 2, which is approximately 1.414, I come out with 39.592 inches. So that will give me a measurement of 28 by 39, almost 39.5 by 28, which will be perfect. Think I'm pretty smart? Not really. Thank goodness for Google. They have answers for everything. Now that we're armed with all that knowledge, we know in order to cut 4 pieces of batting and backing for our 4 corner pieces, we need to cut 2 28-inch squares, cut those in half diagonally, and it will give us exactly what we need to be slightly over 3 inches bigger than the segment we just put together. But hold on, let's wait. You can go ahead and cut out your backing and your batting, but don't layer them yet. Just set them aside because we still have to decide how we're going to quilt our quilt, remember? So we're going to discuss that in our next session. But in the meantime, you'll have all your corners, backing and batting ready to go. I can't wait for our next lesson. I'm so excited to show you how we're going to quilt this. And for those of you who have wanted to learn more ruler work, you're going to need a curved ruler, such as this. Wait until you see the secondary designs that we'll be making by using this ruler. I'm really excited. Also, if you don't have a ruler, don't worry, I'll take care of you. I'll give you the same design that we're going to do with the ruler that you can either trace or create a stencil from to mark your quilt. See you next time.